What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to a cold day in Missouri. As a matter of fact, there was a bunch of snow on the ground this morning. It's since melted off, but it's like 38 degrees. We're out here in the garage and we are back on the SS. Now, in the last video, you guys saw that we got all the front off. We got the heads off. We got all the way down to getting the cam out. So today, that is what we're going to do. We're going to get the old cam out. We're going to get the lifters out. We're going to clean up the heads, and we are going to start the reassembly process. This is exciting because, like I said, I want to blow this thing out so we can get on to other more exciting stuff, not just demod stuff. I know you guys don't like demodding, and neither do I, but like I said, it would be dumb. And my wife kind of likes this car, but she doesn't like the surginess of the cam. And the cam's not really bad, but for a daily driver, it's just not something that she wants to deal with. So we're taking it back to stock. I don't know how long she's going to drive it before I sell it. You know how I am. I like to sell stuff. Chances are it'll be for sale as soon as it's finished. But let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and grab the Torx bit, and I will talk to you about what size that is. We'll get the cam retainer plate off, and then we'll take the lifters out, and then we'll try to get that cam out of there. So to get the cam retainer out, a T40 is what we are going to need. Go ahead and bust these loose. Goodness, they are tight. Woo! I'm afraid I'm going to strip them. That's a little loose. So a pretty common problem on these things is these bolts strip. Whether it's using a cheap bit or they're really Loctited in. So what I've done is I completely stripped this guy. Completely stripped it with a T40. So I hammered a bigger T45 into place once I got it all stripped out, and was able to snap it loose with that. Now, I did call a buddy of mine, David. You guys probably saw him in several videos back. We went to his house when I did my trunnion upgrade for my Trans Am, and he has a shop and he deals with this all the time. I called him. I said, what's my best options? Thankfully, I have buddies that call like that, because he told me, he said, you know, hit it with a hammer a couple times with an extension to try to loosen that up. And a lot of times it'll come loose. He said if that doesn't work, you might try to heat this up, just the block, to maybe loosen up that Loctite that they put on. So like I said, thanks to David, because I did heat it up a little bit. So probably a combination of that, hitting it with a hammer, was able to get this top one loose. Now I still have stripped this guy here. I haven't stripped these two. So I'm going to go get a little better bit. And since I snapped the one I had, and it's almost ready to break. So I'm going to do that. Once I get that done, though, we should be able to get the rest of these out with no issues. So I'm just getting my last one out. And yeah, it sucked. So I went through two of these bits. But it's out. So just so you guys know, on these other two, I didn't have to hammer my 45 on. And you can see the end of that is all bent. But what I did was I put it into place, and I hammered on the end of this. I hit it several times with a hammer, trying to loosen up that thread locker they put on it. They put some pretty good thread locker on it, I would say. So I also heated up that top bolt, but these other ones I didn't have to heat up. So they are out. And thanks again to my buddy David for helping me out there. I don't remember. I think my ZR1 was the exact same way. I think I had issues with that, but it's been a while since I did that. So the older style had a hex head, which was way easier to get out. This newer style obviously has a countersunk Torx bit. So not a big fan of that. But now let's move on to getting the all the lifters out, the lifter trays, and then we'll get that cam out of there. So just 10 millimeters to get these lifter trays out. And then we can pull our lifters out. Sometimes they come out with the trays, sometimes they don't. Okay, so one out of the bunch came out with the tray. I'm just going to put my lifters in a bag for now. None of them came out with that one. That's generally how it works for me. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go grab a magnet and we'll pull these out. See if we can get these lifters out of here. Which I am going to reuse. They're still in great shape. Normally I would replace the lifters if I were doing a cam swap, but because this one has already had aftermarket lifters put in it, I'm going to keep them. Now that all the lifters are out, it's time to get this cam out of here. Now I'm hoping I have enough room in the front. Like I said, I don't want to drain the AC. I think I can move it around in order to get where I need to be. But I'm threading in a couple water pump bolts because this is a 3-bolt cam and it's the same thread, and it basically gives you something to grab onto while you're bringing it out. And you just want to be careful on while you're pulling it out, making sure not to ding up the cam bearings. I mean, it's going to move around, it's going to want to fall as it comes out, but just try to hold it as straight as possible as you're pulling it out. So at this point, now that we have everything off and everything's out of the way, and really we're ready to go back together. But before we go back together, we need to clean some stuff. So all I'm using is a razor blade. I don't recommend using a roll-lock wheel or anything, just a razor blade. And we are going, and I take that back, I'm going to use some carbon brake cleaner on some just lint-free towels, and we are going to scrape the old head gasket material off. That needs to be out of the way so we get a good seal on the new head gasket. So I'm not sure how much of this process I'll show you because it's really time consuming. After we get this head done, or this side of the block, we'll do the other side. And then once we do both sides of the block, we'll do the front cover area. Now it's not as bad, and to be honest with you, this isn't going to be too bad anyway because it has had a set of heads put on it. So we're going to go ahead and get this done, and well, this takes some time, guys, so don't cut corners, don't try to use anything, don't gouge into it. You're going to kind of run along the side of the block. Trying to keep, as you can see, I went ahead and put towels in there, trying to keep as much out of there as possible. So what I do is I kind of scrape and then wipe it on a towel, and just keep doing that method over and over. So, like I said, I'm not sure how much of this I will show you guys, but we're going to get started. So after spending not much time at all, this is just one pass with the razor blade. It's way cleaner. So I'm going to go ahead and use some of that brake clean on a microfiber towel. We're going to try to get the majority of this just scrubbed down one more time. I might go over it one more time with the razor blade. Like I said, I'm not going to show you guys any more of this. It's a pretty simple process. And then we will start the reassembly part. We'll try to get the cam in. That'll be the first step. One other thing is I might, because this had head studs, a lot of times when you take the head off, coolant and everything washes down in the heads, in the holes where the head bolts go. Well, obviously there were studs in there, so we didn't get as much of that. So I might go ahead and run a thread chaser down each one of those just to make sure they're cleaned out. I won't show you guys that process either, But just know that generally I use an old head bolt, and I've got one laying around that's this size. Run it down, I cut a notch in it so it can grab any debris, and run it down to the bottom, run it back out, and then I just vacuum out the hole. So like I said, I'm not going to show you guys that process because it's probably another hour-long process to do each one of those. As you know, there's 10 head bolts on that portion and then 5 across the top, so 15 bolt holes that I would have to thread, and I don't want to bore you guys with a time lapse on that. So the next step, like I said, you will see is us sliding stuff back together. Now that we have the head surface all cleaned off, the cam's out, all that stuff is finished, I did go ahead and take out the block that's in the basically the flywheel stop that I had in there, because I am going to have to turn the motor over here after a while. But before we do that, I do like to go ahead and chase the threads on all the bolt holes, and I like to get all the junk out of them. So like I said, it's not as bad because this had studs in it, and when I took the heads off, not all that fluid rushed in there. But if you're dealing with something where you've taken bolts out and all that stuff flooded in there, I still like to clean them out nonetheless. So a lot of people take an old bolt, which is what I've done here. This is the smaller one, the 10 millimeter that goes up top, and I've cut a groove in it to basically act as a thread chaser. Now, for the bigger hole, I've also done the same thing on an old head bolt, but I also have a chaser that I bought specifically for the LS block. So on the bigger holes, I will be using that. And then once I go over them, I have a kind of a rigged up thing I've got on my vacuum. And so I'm gonna stick that down there and suck out all these holes after I basically use a thread chaser on them. So I'm not gonna show you guys a ton of that process because it is kind of long. But just know that it is something that you need to do, because if there's a bunch of stuff in the bottom of that head stud, or basically the hole where your head bolt or head stud goes, the bolt won't go all the way down, it won't torque correctly, and you could have issues down the road. So it's better safe than sorry. Take your time and do this. So I'm going to get started on that. Like I said, I'm not going to show you guys a ton of it. I will show you just a little bit and probably like a time lapse, and then we'll move on to our next step. Now that we have all the head bolts cleaned out, and that took me about an hour, guys. I did go ahead and clean the tops of the pistons off, just the extra carbon that was on there, and I'm just using some brake clean, carb cleaner, stuff like that. We need to line up the timing gear to get ready to put the cam back in. Now, normally this would be pretty easy if you had the oil pump off, but because this is an aftermarket pump, I'm not changing it, not changing the chain, because it's an aftermarket chain as well. There's no real sense in doing that. So there is a timing mark, and it's hard to see. It's right underneath, and because the heads are off, I've got it at top dead center, so that's a good place to start. But there's a little dot, and it actually lines up with the cam gear. You can't really see it. It's between, let's see if I can hold the light and this at the same time. It's between the pump and the timing, basically the chain and the tensioner. Right below that, you're able to see a little bitty dot, and it is on the leading edge of that, and I've got it lined up facing directly up, and that's what we need to do. We need to go dot to dot with the timing gear, but I wanted to get that in place before I slid the cam in. So I'm gonna go grab the cam now, and I did order an LS9 cam, so this is a little hotter cam than what this car would come with. It might sacrifice a little bit down low, but I didn't want to have to buy a new timing gear because the LS3 is a single bolt, and this did have a 3-bolt cam in it. So I'm gonna go grab the cam. It's a good idea to spray it down, make sure it's nice and clean, and then we will have some assembly lube that we'll put on it as well, and then we'll try to get that thing slid in. So you'll probably want to grab your water pump bolts to thread in the end of that cam as well. That way you have something to hang on to as it gets deeper into the motor. So at this point, I have the new cam out, and we're just going to put a little bit of assembly lube on the front side here, at least enough where I can get this thing in the block. And you also notice that the AC condenser is obviously moved quite a ways out of the way. You do have enough room, and I'm pretty liberal here, guys. I use a lot of this. You may not need to use as much as I use, but I don't know, I'm picky. I clean the cam off really good. A lot of times there's some shavings on it from the manufacturing process. Then I blew it off, put a new pair of gloves on, Chances are I'm probably going a little overboard, but let's see if we can move this thing up and slide this cam into the block. Hopefully you guys are able to see. Now that I have it that far in, I can put this back down. Maybe give you guys a little bit better view of what I have going on here. And I need to put some more of this on there anyway, so. This is messy, let me tell you. This stuff's like snot. And the main areas that I'm concentrating on are where the cam bearings ride. But I'm also putting a little on the lobes as well. Let's see if we can get this thing the rest of the way in there. Alright, it is in. So always keep some towels handy because look at my hands, what a mess, huh? Probably gonna have to change gloves. And the cam is in though. That is exciting news. So the next step is we need to get our cam gear and line up the bottom dot, which means you're probably gonna have to move the cam around a little bit to get that dot facing down, but I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here in just a minute. So I did jump the gun just a little bit. Before you put the outer gear on, we need to put our retainer plate. So our cam retainer plate, you know, the thing that we had a ton of time getting off. I did buy all new bolts. Same, unfortunately they're the same, but this just goes into place here. And then these already have thread lock on them if you buy them from GM, which guys, like always, I'll list it in the description. I'm just gonna hand thread these in, and then we will go grab my torque wrench and we'll torque them down. Doesn't take a ton of torque, and majority of the time the problem that you have getting them out is that thread locker really bites in. And I'm not really sure who put the cam in before, but I don't, and they may have used some, you know, some different thread lock. This is the GM, what comes pre-installed on bolts. So I'm gonna go grab my T40. And the other important thing, guys, you don't wanna get crazy on these because you'll snap this retainer plate. It's easy to crack. So you make sure that, I like to run them down by hand as far as I can and get it nice and centered up because they are recessed. And then we torque them from there. But so these things only get torqued to 18 foot-pounds, so not very much. And I got a brand new bit, so we've got a nice good bite. Not fighting against a bad bit. I don't normally like to use an extension with this, but that bottom one, the chain is kind of in the way, so I'm going to. I just don't think the torque specs are the same. We are good. So now we are ready to grab the timing gear and get it into place. So now we're ready to put that timing gear on, and as you guys can see, there is a marking on the very bottom. Hopefully you guys can see that. That is to line up straight down. So obviously we're probably gonna have to spin our cam around. And this is kind of tricky because we're having to do this at the same time we are trying to line up the timing chain. So it does get a little tricky, but just take your time, and you'll have plenty of room to do this. I'm going to go ahead and get the cam swung over where I want it. At least try to. I may have to go grab my bolts, my water pump bolts, to get everything lined back up. It's not wanting to spin. Yeah, I'm gonna go grab my water pump bolt, so I'm gonna spin this thing around. I got, that stuff gets kind of gooey, that the assembly lube, and sometimes it's just, my hands are slick too, so that doesn't help. So I'm gonna grab those water pump bolts, get it spun over to at least somewhat close to the size or the side that I want it in order to get, I need that dowel pin facing this direction, almost the 3 o'clock position, in order to get everything lined up. Now everything was able to line up. I did have to move this around a couple times, as you guys saw, but I am going to put some thread lock on these guys just to make sure that they don't back out on me. These are ARP bolts. I noticed that whoever put this together before obviously did use some decent bolts at least, but if not, you can reuse the factory GM bolts. But we're good to go. Like I said, I'm going to pull those back out. I just want to get it lined up. I'll pull one out at a time, put some thread lock on, put them back in, and then we'll torque them down. So I'm just using blue Loctite on this. I will tell you guys that 22 foot-pounds is what these guys go down to, but I was looking back and it seems as though the Torx bolts that I just put in for the cam retainer plate, I get some conflicting information. So GM shows a different number than that. It actually shows 11. So if you guys don't feel comfortable taking it to 18, I didn't have any problems. I didn't crack anything or anything like that, but you might want to do 18 on the back bolts, and anyway, these are going to be 22 once I get each one of them, get some Loctite on each one of them. And I'm not using a ton here, guys, just a little bit on the threads. Like I said, I like to thread them all in and then back them out one at a time. Just seems easier. I don't know, I guess you could put Loctite on them as you go, but just the way I do things. Now if you're going back with the single bolt cam, it actually gets 55 foot-pounds, and then it is a torque to yield bolt, so you will have to go over it a little bit differently. But we're set. Now I'm going to go grab the timing cover, and we'll kind of show you guys what intricate parts you need to mess with on that, because it's not really just a place on. I mean, you can, but I want to show you a couple things that we got to do. First of all, we got to hammer out the old basically it's a rubber retainer on the inside, or rubber seal that keeps oil in, and we'll knock it out, but I'll show you guys that here in just a second. So at this point we need to get the old seal out of the way. And what I like to do is just use an old punch and knock it out. And once we do that, obviously this is trash, we'll be replacing it. But I'm going to go ahead and use my razor blade and clean up all this area, especially down here on the bottom, because as you can see, we are going to have to use some silicone. The factory puts a little bit of silicone in these sides because if you don't, it will leak. The pan gasket only goes to here, so in these seams, a lot of times you'll get a leak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab this razor blade, clean all this up all the way around, and then we will talk about reinstalling this thing, because obviously we are going to have to use some silicone, but we need to clean this up first. So at this point, we're ready to put the front cover on. So there's a couple things that you need to know. You can see that I've gone ahead and put my new gasket on around the outside, and I've also threaded in all the bolts in the perimeter. Now down here in the corners, let's see if I can put the light here. So down here in these corners where the block meets the oil pan, you're going to need to put a little bit of sealant, and that's what I've got here. I've just got some Permatec or Permatex, whatever you want to call it, just some gray. You can use black, gray, whatever you'd like. So I'm going to put a little bit of a bead kind of down there where, like I said, the block meets the oil pan. Same thing on the other side. Now before I line this up, I'm also using, get my light back up top here, I'm also using an alignment tool. That's why I didn't press that new piece of rubber, that seal in there, because you have a ton of movement once you put that into place. So what I do is I'm going to go ahead and put this in the center once I get this up into place, and that will allow me to keep it aligned while I'm tightening this all down. So that is what this is for, guys. I definitely recommend getting one of these. The other thing is, once we do that, this also works as a seal installer. So we'll be able to install that once we get this all tightened down. So it serves two purposes, and I definitely, like I said, I definitely recommend you guys getting one of these. There is a ton of play with that in place, and this will just keep that from leaking down the road. It's perfectly centered once you get it in there. So I'm going to start getting all this ready to go, and we should have the cover on, and then we'll talk about the torque specs once we get it on. Now, also, there are two bolts that come in from the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get these started, and then I'll run the other ones up from the bottom, and then, like I said, we'll talk about torque specs. So as you can see, I have my installer tool in the center, so we have no movement back and forth. I'm going to go ahead and just randomly tighten several of these, not real snug, but just to bring it up to the block, and then we'll be able to get those bottom ones in place. And then we can remove our tool. Now that we have them all ran down, we just need to torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Now, I will tell you guys, I like to alternate, so I'll do one down here, maybe one up here, kind of like you would put on a wheel. It doesn't really call for that, but that's just the method that I've always used. So we're gonna get these things torqued down. We'll be able to remove our alignment tool, and we will be set on the timing cover. I did have to remove the idler, or the idler pulley here, in order to get torque on this last one back in the back here. And the bottom ones, guys, I literally just did with a wrench. So chances are they should be good. I tightened them up with a pretty small wrench, just a 10 millimeter. And you should use a crow's foot, but I don't really have any, and I don't have a ton of access to that. So we are good. Now let's see what I want to move on to next. Now that that is completely tightened up, torqued down, I think I'm just going to go ahead and start putting stuff back together that I had to take apart, like this guy here. I'm going to go ahead and put the alternator back into place, and then I might honestly go ahead and grab the water pump and put it into place, just because, well, I'm really not ready to put the heads on yet. I don't know why. I think mainly because I do have to clean them up still. They were used, I bought them used, and I still have to clean the bottom of those. So I think I'm gonna go ahead, do some of the front stuff here, and then we'll move on, hopefully, to the heads, the lifters, all that stuff. So I do like to torque these down. 37 foot-pounds is generally all I like to put on them. Now, the AC shows to torque to 43 to the block. But man, that's, I don't know. 37 is what I've always used, and it's generally what the book called for on an LS one. So that's what I'm going to do on this guy. Just 37 foot-pounds on all the block bolts. So to gain access to that one bolt, or the actual bracket, I did have to take this idler pulley off. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down. And I generally don't torque these guys, I just get them snug. Now actually, before I put the water pump on, I am going to go ahead and put the seal in here. And this is why I like this tool. So once you use it for an alignment tool to align the center of your front timing cover, you can use it to drive in your new seal. So it actually has a 2-in-1. It works 2 different ways, which makes it really nice. Don't mess up your seal trying to bang it in any other way. The other cool thing is you make sure it's perfectly centered, like I said, using the using that alignment tool. So I just use a rubber mallet, and it doesn't take much to knock it into place, other than my wires being in the way down here. So that is in. You take our tool out. Sometimes it likes to stick on there. We'll get it off here. And we are set. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the water pump. Now that I have all the new gaskets on, I've got the bolts threaded through there, and you don't have to do that. It's just, I don't know, to me it's a little easier. I'm going to go ahead. I did clean all the surfaces off, guys. You guys know I did that before. Of course, it's upside down. Gotta flip it over without knocking all my bolts out. Probably easier said than done. Got it. So now, see if we can get this thing somewhat into place. And people go back and forth on whether you should put any kind of sealant on these threads. Guys, it doesn't have any from the factory, so I don't use any. That's just kind of the way I do it. So if it had some from the factory, then I might do that. But because it doesn't, I'm not putting any on there. So torque specs are 11 the first pass, and I'm going to alternate like I did before, and then 22 the second. I've got 2 wrenches set up to make it easier on camera. There's 11. Now let's do 22. And we are done with the water pump. So as you can probably see, I have the lifters up here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the lifter trays back in, and obviously with the lifters. But before I do that, I'm going to take my vacuum and clean, just vacuum out this section here, just to make sure if anything like lint or anything got down in there, that's out of the way. So I'm going to grab that, like I said, the vacuum that out on both sides, and then we should be good to put the lifters and lifter trays in. Now I am reusing the lifters that were in it because they are aftermarket, and I'm also reusing the lifter trays. Now normally I would replace the lifter trays, but they were replaced when this was done about 10,000 miles ago. I just don't see the need in that. But what I did do, guys, is I cleaned them up really well and blew them out. So well, let's get them back into place. So now we're ready to load these things up and put the lifters back into place. Guys, these only go in one way, and sometimes you do have to wiggle them around to get them to fit, but just know that sometimes it's a pain, and I just had better luck putting them in like this than trying to put the lifters in and then line these up. It just seems like that's the better way to do it. And your cutouts face down, just so you guys know. I may have to get my light. First one went in pretty good. Now all we put is just a small little dab on there. Go ahead and run these down. These are 10 millimeter. And then we will torque them. They get torqued very, very lightly. 106 inch-pounds is what they go to. So not a whole lot on these guys. So as I said, 106 inch-pounds, which guys, that is not very much. I almost got it that tight, just hand tightening them. Now it's time to move on to those heads. So we're starting on another day. I actually lifted this up so I could put my Corvette back under here, but it's back out. But since I've got it up in the air, I did go ahead and put back in the flywheel stop up here. And so the reason I did that is I'm gonna go ahead and put the harmonic balancer into place. You guys can see it. Hopefully, I'm banging the camera on everything, but you can see where it goes right there. And I did get a new one because the old one was an ATI. Now, something really odd is this friction washer. I don't know that you necessarily need it, but I'm gonna put it on. It's relatively expensive in my opinion. It's like 15 bucks for this stupid thing, and it's literally paper thin. But we're gonna get that up in there, get the pulley on, and I'm gonna use my installer tool, which you guys definitely need this. Don't try to bang on your new harmonic balancer. You definitely wanna use a puller or a installer like this. So I'm gonna grab all this stuff, get it together, and we'll see if we can get that balancer installed. So unfortunately guys, there's no good way to show you this, but that threads into the center of the crankshaft, and then basically you pull it on by just adjusting this a little bit at a time until it stops. And just a long time consuming process, but that will pull the harmonic balancer on nice and straight. Now that we have that thing on up there, it is time to put a new bolt in. Now, if you bought a reusable one, obviously you can reuse it, but I didn't. I just bought a GM one, so you are gonna have to stretch this. I'm gonna go ahead and thread it in, and then we'll talk about the torque specs and kind of how we're gonna do that. Now that we have the bolt in, the first step we need to do is we need to torque that bolt down to 111 foot-pounds. Once we do that, we're gonna back it off 360 degrees, and then we're gonna tighten it to 59 foot-pounds, followed by 125 degrees. So it's kind of a pain in the fact that you can't just torque it and forget it, but that's just making sure it's seated is the reason they do that procedure. So what I will do is I'll go ahead and do that, and then before I do the 125 degrees, I'm gonna put a mark on it, and I'll show you guys that before I go ahead and swing it past for the 125 degrees, because that's really the best way. I don't have a torque gun that measures degrees, so and your chances are you're gonna have to use a breakover bar for this, but I'm gonna get it all tightened up, loosened up, then tightened up again, and then I'll mark it and I'll show you guys what we're looking at. Now you guys can see I've got it tightened to that last 59 foot-pounds, and I have a mark right here in the top. And so what I'm gonna do is, obviously straight down would be 180 degrees. We're trying to get to the 125 mark, so directly right would be 90, so we're gonna try to be somewhere in between those two. Now this isn't like super accurate, but it'll keep it from coming off, believe me. I've never had one come off. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my breakover bar and a cheater pipe and get that tightened down, and then we'll get this thing down. Actually, I'll probably go ahead and put the starter in. I won't show you guys that, but we'll get it down on the ground and then hopefully start on the heads. So we're down here with the starter, and I am gonna go ahead and torque it down. I got it back in. Guys, there's a ton of stuff to remove to get the starter out. There's a bracket that mounts to the pan, and to the top of the starter. You have to loosen all those 10 millimeters, and then there's a heat shield that goes on it, which is kind of nice, to be honest with you. But we are back in, and all I need to do is torque these two bolts, the actual bolts that hold the starter in, to 37 foot-pounds, and then I can put the heat shield back on. I think it's like 6 millimeter little screws that go into it, and like I said, we'll be able to drop it back down and start working on those heads. So I got this thing back down on the ground. I went over the head one more time, And I also went ahead and put my dowels in place. So now I'm going to go ahead and put my head gaskets on, and they should just snap over the dowels. Not really snap, but just set there. And I'm going to go grab a head and put it on. Now the bolts that I'm using are from Jegs, and they're their brand, and it says that they lube them with 30 weight motor oil. So they do have washers on them. Let me grab one here and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. So they have washers on them, and they do have a chafer, and that chafer goes towards the bolt head. The little ones that go up top, you don't have to concern yourself with that, but I'm going to go grab the head. We're going to set it into place and hopefully get this thing started to tighten down. Now that the head's on, I've got me a cup of 30 weight motor oil, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit on the top and bottom side of the washer, and it's going to get messy unfortunately, but then I'm going to start to thread these in just by hand, making sure that the head doesn't move. As you can see, I put a couple in, and I'm going to pull those back out to put some oil on them, but this is going to be a pretty long process would be my guess, so I'm going to get started. So now we need to start running them down, and I made a sequence. Hopefully you guys can see that. I'll try to list it in the video as well, but I wrote it on a piece of paper because honestly I get tired of looking at it on my phone. So I'm going to start to tighten these things down, and not real tight, just get them snug, and then we'll go through the torque process because there is 3 steps to it. So I'm going to get started by just snugging this down, and I'm going to go in the pattern that you would normally bolt them down or torque them down. Now that we have them all ran down, it's time to start torquing them. And the first pass on these guys is 30 foot-pounds. Now that's all the big ones. And then after that, I'm going to go and do 25 on the little ones. And then after that, I don't remember here, 50 on the second pass, and then 75 on the third pass. These at the top only go to 25. So probably what I'm going to do, go through the 30, then the 25, go through the 50, do these at 25 again, and then last go through the 75 and do 25 again. So that'll kind of be the process that I do, and this is going to take some time as well. We now have this head on this side completely torqued down and tightened up. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the other one on. I won't show you guys that. And then hopefully we'll move on to like the Valvetrain, rocker arms, push rods and whatnot. And just getting a little closer little by little. Now that we got both heads on, I'm going to go ahead and put the push rods in. And I do like to put a little bit of oil on both sides. And they should just drop into place. So once we get that done, then we'll get the rockers into place. Now that we have all the push rods in, I'm going to go grab the rockers and rocker stands, and we're going to put those all into place at one time. And then we'll talk about torque specs, whether I'm going to use or not use Loctite on the rocker bolts. But I'm going to go grab those, we'll slide those into place. So I'm not going to use any thread locker on these, but what I am going to do is spray all the oil off of them and just try to clean them up a little bit. Once we get them in, I'm going to go ahead and torque them all to 22 foot-pounds is what it calls for. You need to make sure that if you're doing LS3, there is an offset. Basically, there's an offset on the intake side, I believe. So you need to make sure that you have the right rocker in the right location. But other than that, some people use Loctite. Some people say it'll round off the heads of the bolts when you go, if you ever had to take it apart. The other thing is sometimes there's a torque sequence where like number one's at top dead center and you would just tighten down certain ones. Guys, I've never followed that procedure, never had any issues. If you want to follow that, there is a procedure for tightening certain ones when it's off the cam lobe. I'm not going to go through that process. I'm literally going to torque them all to 22. I'm going to roll the engine over, and I'm going to make sure that everything's still at 22, and we are going to be good. So now I've ran all these down just finger tight, well, with my ratchet, and I'm going to go ahead and torque everything to 22 foot-pounds. I'm going to roll the motor over, and then we will torque them one more time before you get ready to put the valve covers on. So at this point, I do have new valve cover gaskets. The other ones weren't, I don't think they were probably bad, but I just, you know, you're tearing this all apart, you might as well do the right thing. So I'm going to take a little bit of this cleaner. I'm going to run around the areas on the outside. I already cleaned them out. I just want to clean out this channel that the actual gasket sets in. And then we'll put the new gasket in. Maybe it didn't need this, but like I said, if you're taking it apart, you might as well do it the right way, right? So now that we got that all cleaned out, the gasket kind of only goes in one way. So there's cutouts in it. You can see these three little spots right here. Those guys go there. And that's generally where I start on these. You want to make sure that you get them pushed down in that channel. And so what I'll do is I'll start it, and then I'll go back and make sure that it's pushed in all the way. Not hard, just time consuming. And it likes to move around on you, I'll tell you that. Probably should have done this on a table, but I wanted to show you guys what was going on, how to do it. Sometimes it's a stretch. I will tell you the old ones, sometimes they like to come out or stick to the head too, so once we got it pretty much in place, then I'm just going to go ahead, go all the way around and make sure it's completely seated. And I really meant to grab the the driver's side first, but I ended up getting the passenger. So the other thing I'm going to do is, since these heads were used, and I did clean them up quite a bit, I'm going to go over the basically where this mounts with a little bit of that and a towel as well, to make sure we get a good, nice, clean seal. But we got the new gasket in, ready to go on. Like I said, I'm going to clean off that head surface with this towel, and then we'll get that thing on. So I put a little of that brake clean on a towel, and just going around this surface here. That way we know we get a good clean seal. No debris. And this guy just sets in place. And sometimes these are a pain to get started, sometimes not. Now that we got both the valve covers on with new gaskets, it's time to torque them down. And guys, 106 inch-pounds, so you are going to need an inch-pound gun, which you're going to need on this project anyway. But I'm going to start in the middle, work my way out. So I'll go here, then that one, and then alternate. 106 inch-pounds is not very much, I'll tell you that. And they were on way tighter than that.